Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 86 of Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. Christmas trees are up, stockings are hung, the season is decorated with care. All the songs say it's so, and so who am I to doubt their sounds of music and melody? Let freedom ring, let truth prevail, let love have its say, and then double down on the sentiment. If you say the skies are blue, I would not let this rain deceive. And if there's one thing I've always been sold on, it is promises. And even if your words are empty, I will store them as a gift of lessons learned. And if your voice is rich and overflowing, I will eye each action after on its own grounds. And if you say the cup is full, I will not let this desert choke my trust. And if you say my breath is stolen, I will hold faith firmly in tired lungs. Thank you for tuning in this evening. I'm your host, Scott Thomas Outler, and it is Monday, December 9th, 2019. We will be here live for the next hour, and I'll be joined in the next segment by tonight's guest, Heather Haven. Heather is the author of several different series of mystery and romance books that she'll be coming on to discuss, including her most recent release, Christmas Trifle. Her interview is coming up shortly, so please do stay tuned for that. I do encourage listeners to please take a moment and subscribe to the 17 Numa Radio channel. It's easy to do, and it's free. All ye have to do is click the follow button found on the page where this episode is streaming, and that'll get you signed up. A reminder to everyone that all past episodes of Songs of Selah can be accessed or downloaded for later listening from the archive here on the channel or from the Songs of Selah page at 17numa.com. Be sure to check out some of the recent episodes when you're in the mood, featuring interviews with guests such as George Weinstein, Kashiana Singh, Peter Rowitz, Donna Snyder, Raquel Mejia, and Heath Brocker from last week's show. Thank you to each of them for appearing. And big thank you as well to everyone who spreads the word about this program and shares episode links. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you're interested in appearing as a guest on a future episode of this podcast, or you'd like to recommend other guests, please feel free to contact me via email at 17numa@gmail.com, or connect with me and send a message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I'd be happy to get you set up for an upcoming episode in the early months of 2020, which I'm currently scheduling at the moment. I do a fairly decent job at this point of life of not living vicariously through people, events, or circumstances that are outside of my control. I have enough on my hands trying to deal with my own concerns as it is, so getting overly caught up in what's going on in the world at large only adds to the weight. But I fully confess that when it comes to UGA football, I just can't seem to help myself get swept up in the atmosphere and excitement of each season. There's too much tradition in my blood passed down from my father and grandfather to be able to passively approach the games from a detached state of mind or heart. And so watching UGA get completely dismantled and torched against LSU in the SEC championship game this past weekend was definitely a bitter pill to swallow. But what I am able to do much better now than in the past is to focus on the highs and enjoy them fully, and let the lows quickly disperse whenever they happen to take a swing. The bottom line is that it was a hell of a season, and I'm thankful for the memories during the past few months during some great victories, regardless of the team having taken one on the chin in the biggest moment. It doesn't ultimately affect my life the way it does the actual players and coaches who are on the field giving their time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears year-round. And I'm not a fair-weather fan who will spit and curse and call the team a bunch of bums when things aren't rosy. I'd rather just say that I respect their love for the game and for the university they represent, and I wish all the seniors well in their lives ahead after graduating. I know it's not the way they would want their time at UGA to end. Losing 37-10 isn't an easy way to go out, but they're still one of the best teams in the nation, and the future remains ever bright. Anyway, there is still a bowl game left to play, even though the playoffs weren't reached. It was announced today that UGA will be playing Baylor in the Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day. So good luck, Godspeed, and go Dogs. All right, that'll be the last football segment here on the show until next season. Wasn't quite as much fun this time around as in the previous weeks when we were steadily winning, but that's just how the cookie crumbles and the milk spills. The measure of success isn't determined in whether you win or lose, but in how you handle good fortune and how you respond to adversity when it arises. And that ain't just in sports, but in every moment of our lives. And on that note, that'll just about wrap things up here at the top of the show. Let's go to a music break now and then come back on the other side with tonight's guest, Heather Haven. Stay tuned.
Coming up only
welcome back to Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. That last piece of music was Silver Threads by pianist Vlada Mars, who's a past guest here on the program. Tonight's guest, Heather Haven, has won awards for her short stories, novels, comedy acts, television treatments, and ad copy. While in New York, her one-act plays were mounted at Manhattan's famed Playwrights Horizon. She ghost-wrote a book on how to run an employment agency, followed by a stint at No Soap Radio, where she delivered humorous advertising. Since moving to the West Coast, she has penned 4 mystery series: The Alvarez Family, Persephone Cole Vintage, Love Can Be Murder, and the Snow Lake romantic suspense novels, of which Christmas Trifle, Book 1, debuted in September of 2019. Her docufiction Murder Under the Big Top and her anthology Corliss and Other Award-Winning Stories round out her work. Heather and her husband are allowed to live in the foothills of San Jose with their precocious cat, Ellie. Thank you so much for joining the program tonight, Heather. How are you doing?
Thank you. That was beautifully said. My goodness, you should be a radio announcer. Oh, wait a minute, you are. Okay. No, that was great. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. Got a lot to talk about tonight. I want to get into those aforementioned 4 series of books that you have and your writing process and a lot on that front. But we met each other earlier this year, both as guests on Barbara Ehrentreu's program, and there was something mentioned during that show that just got glossed over at the moment, but I was hoping maybe we could start there because it seemed interesting to me. You had mentioned that when you were growing up, your family was involved with the Ringling Brothers Circus down in Florida, and I was just curious about what that experience was like and how that was as a child.
Well, I was very young. My parents met in the circus. My mother was 1st of May. She had 2 other pals, and they were always palling around together in New York City, and they hated the winters there. So they decided that they were going to join the circus, which they knew wintered in Sarasota, Florida. So they joined the circus. My mother's 2 friends were very tall. They were nearly 6 feet tall, and so they were showgirls. And my mother was sort of ahead of her time in a lot of ways, but one of the ways was that she was a dancer, but a very athletic dancer. She was into the aerobics and tumbling and things like that, which a lot of women, especially then, weren't. So she wound up being that go-to chorus girl, and then for doing everything that the other women were more or less afraid to do or couldn't do. And then she wound up being featured in a lot of things. And she actually had 11 costumes during each performance because she was always running and doing something during the show. And my father was an elephant trainer. He started as just one of the handlers and worked his way up to being the lead trainer. And he was a man who believed in being more loving than vicious with them or trying to intimidate them. He got rid of the eye hooks and things like that. So my mother and he fell in love. She fell in love with him because he was so kind to the animals, and she was always a very big animal person. So they met and they married and lived there. And then after a while, I was born, and there you have it. But they left when I was like actually 3 or 4 or something, so I don't remember a lot of it, but I have a lot of pictures.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess, did that continue your affinity for animals through the years?
It did. I think my mother, she actually, we'll talk about her a little bit if you want. My mother, who was featured, I used her as my muse for Murder Under the Big Top because I wasn't around then, but I had so many stories and pictures, and she would write articles. She was a big diary keeper. And so I knew a lot of what was going on, and I just kind of made it my muse. What would it be like when she was 20? And I went there. But even later on in her life, she trained the dog for Annie, the musical, the first Annie Sandy the dog. She didn't find the dog, but once the dog was found, she helped train the dog and then the subsequent dogs on Annie on Broadway. So she continued being an animal lover and working with them all of her life, really.
Well, that's pretty interesting and pretty cool that you went back and explored what you thought it might have been like through one of your characters. It must have been a fun experience to work with that one. So then,
it was a lot of fun. It was fun. It was more than fun. It was also very stressful because you're trying to do right by your mother, by her memories, by all of that. So I had to double check everything because she was in her 80s by the time I was writing this, to make sure that she still remembered right or that it was accurate. So I did a lot of research. It took me 6 years to write the book, and it was because there was so much research that needed to be done to make sure that it was true. So I actually call it, even though it's a mystery, I call it a docufiction because the day-to-day existence of Ringling Brothers during the Second World War is absolutely accurate, spot on. I did so much research. I have so many pictures and things like that. I interviewed people who were there at the time, so I know that that is what it was going on, which was an extremely big, it was the biggest Ringling Brothers has ever been during that period because we were coming as a country out of the Great Depression, and people were depressed, and they were looking for entertainment, something to take their minds off of it for a little while. And that's why, that's the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movies were big then. But so was Ringling Brothers. They had 70 cars they traveled with. This was train cars. They had 51 elephants. Over 1,000 people. 1,000 people, 1,600 animals. Sometimes they went to small towns throughout our country, especially back in the late 30s, early 40s, that were little rinky-dink towns. People would come from many small towns all over to be there, wherever, but they had to have a railway. That's kind of how they got to all these towns. And, of course, the railroads were much bigger then than they are now. So that's how they did all their traveling. And so they would go to wherever there was a large field that they could camp. They would rent it. Am I talking too much? Do you want to hear this, or do you want to talk about something else?
Oh, you're fine. Absolutely.
Okay, well, good. Because sometimes I go off on a tangent. But first of all, it was at the end of the Great Depression, and it was still with us, really. A lot of farms had been foreclosed, so you had empty spaces. So they would be rented by either the city council or somebody like that or the bank who had the foreclosure. And they would rent them to the circus. So it would be many acres, like maybe 20, 40 acres that they would rent. And this enabled them to set up the large tents, especially the big top, and then being able to have all of the animals, the elephants, horses, tigers, whatever, there, and so that they could be exercised and watered and all of that stuff. The behind the scenes of what happened with Ringling Brothers was, I find, even much more interesting than what the people went to see in the Three Rings, because it was a huge traveling city.
I can only imagine what it must have been like going from town to town back then, and it makes sense trying to raise people's spirits with the bread and circus. Absolutely, I guess is where that term
I guess so. Yes, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not like that now, and it's probably good. Everything has its ending and its time. Although, to be honest, when Ringling Brothers closed just a couple of years ago or something, I was very sad because it meant that an end of an era that had been so important to my family was ended. It was over, and so it was sad for me. But my mother, who, had she still been alive, she passed away almost 5 years ago, would probably have been very philosophical about it, because she was just this great, funny, wonderfully pragmatic woman who just dealt with things the way they were and would have said, okay, its time came, its time went, but it was fun while we had it.
Well, it's great that you created that book. I guess you're talking about Murder Under the Big Top. Is that where
Yes,
this story goes into?
Yes.
And how did your mom feel about that book?
Well, yeah, exactly. I was kind of afraid, because I was making the story up. The story, there was no murder there. There was none of that was happening. And the background that I gave her and Whitey, who was my father in the book, was, I made it up. You know, it's fiction. I was making it up. But what was true was the day-to-day life that they were living. When they would go in and out of scenes that made the story more dramatic, they would come back to the existence that was very real. So, which is why I call it a docufiction, because that part was real. But a lot of the other stuff, the storyline itself, did not take place. I made it all up because that's what I do.
Well, that's the name of the game for sure. And so I guess that early experience being around the performers and everything must have played a part in you going back to New York and working there on Broadway behind the scenes and putting on your own acts. How was that part of your life?
Yeah, I think I've been in show business or the theater all my life. I don't know anything else. When my mother left, and she didn't want to have children and be traveling. It was just a decision for her that she wanted to. So she actually stayed in Sarasota. I was born in Sarasota. But she always was in show business because she was a very talented, beautiful lady. She was very beautiful. So show business and she just clicked. And so she was a singer, and of course she was a dancer and all of that. So performing and that sort of thing became her life. And as I said, but she always had a love of animals. So when she was older, she just started helping to train animals for the stage.
And then in your own personal journey, when you were putting on your plays up there in New York, what was the experience like back in those days?
I went to New York to be an actress, and I quickly learned that I absolutely hated it. I just hated being called talent. I hated traveling. I didn't like any of it. What I liked was sitting in one place and writing dialogue and narrative that sent everybody else somewhere, and I could stay home. So I gravitated pretty quickly to writing, but it's very difficult to make a living as a writer. Even when you're wonderful, most of them, it's just difficult. So I found ultimately that while I did have a job during the day. Most of the time I worked for No Soap Radio, and then I worked for a couple of advertising agencies. But at night I would go to the theater, where I was actually making fairly good money, and I would work with very nice, wonderful, talented actors and singers and dancers who were lots of fun, and the kind of people I was used to being around. I'm used to being around theatrical people. So it was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed it. And I worked a few really good shows, A Chorus Line and Annie, and what else? There's other ones in there. And during the time I was there, I met my husband, who was a performer and a wonderful singer, and he was doing jingles in New York City. Plus, he was also with Jesus Christ Superstar. He performed that. The first one on Broadway for a while. No, Grease. It was Grease, and then he was in a traveling thing of Jesus Christ Superstar. So he was a performer, and I worked backstage, but I was a writer. And then we got married and decided, well, I'll tell you, Scott, what is wonderful and fun when you're 20 becomes a little more tedious when you hit 40. So we just decided that we wanted to have a little bit more stability to our lives. So we left New York and came to California.
Well, all those early experiences and being around those cast of characters and everything must have given you plenty of material to work with through the years. When was it that you decided to turn your attention toward writing mysteries?
Let's see. Well, I've always loved mysteries, and like so many people, I started on Nancy Drew. Actually, Trixie Belden. Maybe some of your listeners remember Trixie Belden. I was, I don't know, young. She was a 12-year-old junior detective, and then Nancy Drew. So it was something that I had always gravitated to. But interesting, when I was in New York, I only really wrote dialogue. I would write acts for people, and I wrote some ad copy, but that's only like a minute or two. And then usually you're having somebody deliver or say the dialogue, say the copy. So I was really always writing words that people or actors would deliver. And it wasn't until we came to California that, and I think my husband said, well, why don't you try a novel? I went, oh, my God, I can do that. I thought. It was not as easy as I thought it was going to be, but I certainly thought I might try it, so I did. But it wasn't until we came out to California, and I would say probably in the mid-'90s, late 90s, something like that. That's when I started writing narrative or novels.
Now you're, 14 books in or so, something around there, I think I read.
Yes, and I'm writing my next one, which actually, when you talk about the theater, it's Casting Call for a Corpse is the one I'm writing right now. And it takes place backstage of a theater, but plus it also takes place, it's in San Francisco, so it takes place, one of the painted ladies, the Victorian houses that they have here in San Francisco. Yeah, so it takes place in those. And I'm not finished with it because there's a big revelation going on. I am now in the midst of rebranding and refreshing my book covers and stuff like that. So I'm in the process of doing all of that. So writing at the moment has had to be put on a back burner. Not completely, but a large part of it has been delayed because I'm trying to just refresh the whole thing, make people of today want to read the books. That's what I'm doing.
Okay, absolutely. And has that been a fun experience getting to go back and revisit some of those earlier titles and get reacquainted with them as you work to rebrand them?
That's interesting. Thank you for asking that, Scott, because yes, I started with the first one. Now we're talking about just the Alvarez family murder mysteries because those are my biggest sellers by a lot. So, and I love doing the series. So I went back to the very first one, which I wrote in 2005, and I found that it didn't need a lot of. I had tried at the time because I'm in Silicon Valley, so I am. And I was working at Stanford, so I was kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff. And so what I found is that it's just starting. I needed to refresh a couple of things, but not much, because I was envisioning things, and in a sense, I was almost a little ahead of myself, which was good, because now I'm sort of caught up. So that was a lot of fun, and that was interesting for me to do that, to find out that I had sort of invented. At the time, in my mind, I had invented a flash drive because they weren't around then that much. And I said, well, this must be wouldn't it be wonderful if this was out here? So you know this. You have a vivid imagination too. I just let myself run wild, and sometimes you hit the right thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You could have branded it as science fiction back at the time too. They're always on the cutting edge and inventing things
Right.
that seem to come out a couple decades later.
Yeah, that's true. Now, do you write science fiction?
I read it. I used to write
Ah.
some short stories years ago, but just more of a fan, I guess, of the genre than anything.
Right. I love science fiction, but I find I don't write it, but I do love to read it myself, and big fan of loved Star Trek. You know, when that first came out, I was quite young at the time, but I loved it. Still going strong, isn't it?
It really is. Star Trek, Star Wars, both those franchises have definitely done well for themselves, to say the least.
Very much, yeah, and they still keep getting new fans all the time.
And I guess that gets back to that rebranding and refreshing the memory of keeping things fresh in people's minds.
Yeah.
Keeps it rolling along.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that book. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know what I was going to say. You go.
Okay. I was going to mention that you had said that book we were talking about earlier took you 6 years to write. What's the general time that a manuscript takes you to work on?
Usually it's going to take around a year. But, you know, I'm fairly driven. One lovely person said that I have a fire in the belly. I thought that was very funny. But you know, I have acid reflux. But I find that a year, 12 months to 15 months is just about as long as a novel is going to take me by the time I work it all out. And I have fun with all this stuff. I consider it a job, but it's not really like it was in the old days when my salary was dependent on it when I was going to work and I had to do it. I don't have the stress factors most of the time. Sometimes I have the stress factor because I have a deadline, maybe at the editor or something. You know, there are deadlines that I'm called upon to make. But most of the time, I can muse for a while and go, well, what is that word I'm looking for? And maybe I'll spend, 30 minutes and looking for the correct word or the wonderful word that I want to use. I could discard it the next day, but that's what I do. So that's what it is. It takes me about a year. I once, because I was, when I was with another publisher, they had asked me to deliver, could I do a prequel to a book that they were doing. So it was a 2-book deal. And I had to do it within 3 months, actually 4 months, and I thought I was going to die. I was working 11 to 12 hours every day. I never went anywhere. I said to my husband, have a nice summer, darling, because you're not going to be seeing me. I'm going to be in here. And I did crank it out. I did turn it out. It came out. I was proud of what I did. But it was a lot of work, and it's something I really don't want to have to ever do again. It's just too stressful.
Well, it does add another element to it when you're able to enjoy what you're doing and getting the most out of it in that way, too.
Yeah, it's not work.
Yeah, exactly. I'd read about some of these groups that you're in, the Mystery Writers of America and the Romance Writers of America, and how you also like attending the different writers' conventions. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of getting out and being around other writers and what that does for your own creativity?
Sure. Writing is a very solitary thing. As, it's self-evident. You're just sitting at a keyboard and you're banging everything out. But somewhere in there, you need to, that most writers feel this way. You really need to mix with other people and express ideas, and it's like that, osmosis, that when cells meet and they exchange, nuclei and stuff. Are you with me? Right?
Yeah.
It's similar to that I think you need to be out people because it's solitary, but you don't want it to be so isolated that you're not sure what's going on. So I belong to actually three writing organizations. One of them is Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, and now I've joined the Romance Writers of America. I'm just newly joined within the past couple of months because of Christmas Trifle, which came out in September, and that's my romantic suspense. I'm trying to get into that field, which is a totally different genre than just pure mystery, completely different. So I'm trying to break into that, but those are the organizations I belong to. So, and we have meetings. They have monthly, Sisters in Crime has monthly meetings. I try to go. Actually, I was until a few days ago the events coordinator for Sisters in Crime NorCal, which is the Northern California chapter. I organized events for each of the monthly meetings. I did like 7 of them a year. And Mystery Writers of America, I have a similar job. I do take mostly libraries and things where we have our members come and they talk to the public, and they kind of like this, but it's more, it's not as, it's one-on-one, but there can be like maybe 15, 40 people in there, and they ask a bunch of questions, and it's all very fun. But it's a learning and growing experience for the writer, and that's important because you get too stilted and you get too caught up in your own little minute way of doing things, and you need to have other people there. You have to be around people who can say, well, what about that? Also, you need to be challenged. I belong to a writing group too, and we send our work periodically to each other, and then they kind of say, well, why, what's that? Or I didn't understand that. Or, sometimes you think you're making something very clear, but they don't get it at all because it's only in your mind it's clear. It's not clear on paper, and that's what we're dealing with. It's the written word. Anyway, so we all love the written word, don't we? I mean, you're in that too. You love the written word.
Absolutely, and I think I echo that. Being around the other writers and being challenged, as you just mentioned, is important. And so transitioning into that new mystery romance field, was that a challenge in itself, and how did you take on that new approach?
Well, first of all, I thought I was going to die. So was it a challenge? Yes. The first thing I did was I thought I was going to write just a pure romance. 6 months, because I'm stubborn, for 6 months I came and sat in my office, at my desk, at my computer, at my keyboard, hating every minute I was sitting there. I had no idea why I was there, but I would talk, it's a job. So you say, okay, you can do this. So you just start banging on the keyboard and putting out a bunch of words. After 6 months, I had to face that I had written the most boring, what's that word? When it was pretense, you're pretending it's important, but it's not.
Okay.
I just was. Yeah, what is that called when something is that self-important kind of thing?
A facade or pretension?
Well, pretension's going to be good enough. So that's what I was doing. And finally I said, I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this. So either I throw this out, and I had written so many words. I was already up to like 70,000 words of nothing, blathering on, blather, blather, blather. It's just awful. But I had created in there, it's not a total loss in some ways because I had created some interesting characters, and I had, because that's all I was working on, I developed all the facets within them pretty strongly. I knew these people very well. So I said, either you throw this out or you have got to do something that you know and that you're good at. So I threw in a dead body. I mean, obviously, I can't do anything unless there's a dead body around. I don't know what that says, but that's the way it is for me. So the minute I did that, everything kind of came to life. The characters had a little bit more sparkle to what they were talking about. They had a little more lift to their walks and everything. So I said, okay. So I went back, I threw the bulk of it out, and I made it a suspense, which became easier then. That became easier. But what I could do was keep the character developments, especially of the two protagonists, this is a story about a married couple who happens to be chefs, and they've lost their way somehow in here, even though they're still madly in love, but they lost their way through ambition and just a lot, and not talking and communicating, all those things which we can all be guilty of. But for them, it fell apart. So they wind up getting divorced, which neither of them want. And now they have to find their way back to each other, is basically what it is. But somewhere in here, there's a couple of murders going on. So they're being accused or being thought of that maybe they've done this. I'm oversimplifying here. But it was easier for me to write their intent, which is very important. What the character's intent is, the motives that drive them. You don't ever bring anybody on scene, and I know this is true also for when you're writing poetry, because there are a lot of similarities. But you don't bring anybody on there unless they want something, even if it's just a glass of water. They have to be there for a reason, and that was what I had been missing, other than my two protagonists who were having all these problems with each other. So, of course, there's a happy ending. I mean, Scott, that's what I do. I do happy endings. It's a romance. They have it's thoroughly satisfying. I mean, a lot of the reviews I've gotten, thank God, this is what I wanted, said that this is just the perfect little book for when, the holidays and for lovers, and because it has a very satisfying happy ending, but they have to work really hard to get there, and they have to learn life lessons. And that's kind of what romance tends to gravitate to. They have more of people having problems and either not facing them or facing them, whereas in most murder mysteries, you're getting on with it, You introduce the characters, and then it's the mystery. What happened? Who did it? All that stuff. Whereas in a romantic suspense, you have to have the motives of the people involved and why they're doing to each other in more of a life and love and romance kind of way. That's what the reader of a romance suspense wants, is to kind of get to know that person inside of it. So that's what I delivered in Christmas Trifle. Thank God. For a while there, I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it.
Yeah, being 70,000 words in and stuck is not a happy place to be, I would imagine. Talking about delivering for the readers, have you found that your core audience from the mysteries followed you along on the new path, and have you sensed a new sense of readership coming in from other audiences?
Yes. Except for your hardcore. Now, within the mystery genre, there are many, many divisions, and you have the crime drama, you have the true crime, you're going to have the grit ones, the ones where they get gritty, and the darker ones, like Ruth Rendell is a darker writer. And then you have some that do forensic. Patricia, her name is not coming to me, but anyway, so there's a lot of different genres that that mysteries are written in. And for the more of the hardcore mystery ones, they're not going to read my stuff anyway. They might, I will tell you though, a lot of them have read Murder Under the Big Top because that is, it's a noir, really, because everybody comes on scene. Remember, I talk about that a lot. When you come on scene, you got to be a reason for being there. But they come on scene, and they all have a secret, and they're all slightly unhappy with the secret. So that's like what noir is all about: secrets and darkness and whatever have you. And but the rest of the stuff I write tends to be a little bit lighter, I hope, happier. People have troubles, but they overcome them. And I think also, I'm going to go into author's message here for just a second, Scott. I believe that everybody has the inalienable right to be happy. And, I mean, Thomas Jefferson said it. He wrote it, right, in the Declaration of Independence. Isn't that what he wrote it in? What's the Constitution, was it? What was it? Declaration of Independence?
It's in the Constitution, I believe. We hold these rights to be self-sufficient.
Well, yeah, whatever it's in, he wrote that, and I believe that. So all of my books try to show that there is a struggle to be happy sometimes, but that is the ultimate goal of everyone. How they make that work out for themselves is sometimes it's very difficult to find the path to happiness, and it's also a very ephemeral thing. You can be happy today and tomorrow not so great, but there's always that striving, the right to strive for happiness, and I am a big believer in that. And so that's more or less what the kind of book I am always going to be writing, no matter what the genre. I don't want to write about sadness and viciousness and violence and people doing awful things to each other, because if I want that, all I have to do is pick up the paper or turn on the TV, right? I'm going to find all of that I want. So I try to write more of an escape thing and happiness, but with some meat to it. There's always a little something. I write a layered kind of story. It's there if you want it, and if you don't want it, just keep on reading and have a few laughs.
Well, I can certainly get behind that message of happiness, and of course you were right. It is the Declaration of Independence. I don't know, my brain shuts down sometimes. This is when I'm
Thank you. I get them confused.
So here at the end of the show, I want to say thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure hearing some of these stories. And any final words you'd like to leave with the audience, where they can find your books? I've got a lot of your links in the show description box that people can check out, but where should they go to find out more?
Amazon. I have everything is on Amazon. I have an Amazon page there. If anybody's interested in my work, that's where it is. And thank you for that. But I do want to say, we're living in troubling times now, and there is a lot of tension and unhappiness. But, you have to strive to find the bright side. You really do, and sometimes it's a lot of work. But don't give up. And I want everyone to have a very happy holiday, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever. And that's what I wish for everyone, but especially you, Scott.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and I wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season as well, and I hope that this year ends on a high note for you, and all the best with what you're working on, going back and looking at those other books and the current one you're working on as well.
Good, and I have to say that I bought your book of the sand, the sand. Say the title for me, please.
Of Sand and Sugar.
Yes, which I love, and I've started it. I've been kind of busy with a lot of stuff, but it's beautifully written. I hope that your readers have bought this book because it's really very uplifting. That's all I can say. I think you wrote a very uplifting book, and thank you for that, because I think there should be more like that out there.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. all we can do is just try to put a little bit of good vibes and energy out into the world, and then maybe we've done our part. That
I hope so.
The pursuit of happiness. That's what I'll take away from this.
Yeah, and thank you very much for taking the time to visit with me. I really appreciate it. And if I talk too much, well, what can I say?
No, not at all. I absolutely enjoyed all the stories and hearing about your work. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope you'll come back on again sometime.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much, Heather. Take
Bye.
care. All right, so thanks again to Heather Haven, and you can check out all her Amazon and personal website links in the show description box. Please do go check that out, and we will be back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern with Anam Sitar joining the program, so I hope you'll tune back in. Going to end the program tonight with the Wallflowers, and this is It's a Dream. Selah.